Alright, so this will probably be an awkward video, not only for me to make, but for people to watch. But I just felt that I should make it, because pretty much the only famous person I've seen talk about the specific type of addiction I'm about to talk about was Russell Brand, or at least the only famous person I've seen talk about it who didn't go straight into the freaking loony bin as Russell Brand, but then it has recently come out that he's just a straight up rapist. So you know what? I feel maybe I should say something. And it's not like this is a secret, because technically I did do a live stream on the Rico Ranch channel, which you can check out if you're curious, a little while ago, and I did mention it there as well, so like it is technically public knowledge. Sorry, Cat has interrupted me. He's just kind of sniffing around right now, and now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, now you're purring? Now you want attention? There's not really a good place to start this, at least I don't think there is. But I guess the best place to begin is to say that you can get addicted to anything. Like, people tend to think of addiction as being to chemical substances like hard drugs or cigarettes or alcohol. And yeah, those are very, very addictive because your body becomes physically dependent on them, as well as you being mentally dependent on them. But you can get addicted to pretty much anything, including gambling and sex and porn, although those last two are basically the same thing. These are all things that make your brain light up. You know, they increase dopamine, they make you happy, and so sometimes you can overdo it. Like, some people just can't handle alcohol. Some people can't. My father, I've mentioned once or twice, was an alcoholic, and eventually that led him into doing meth, and that is eventually what killed him. He died of an overdose. And I mean, I watched this from my childhood. Like, I watched this happening to this man that I loved, because again, that was my dad. I was a little kid. And even as I got older and became more resentful of him, he was still my dad, but I watched his addiction ruin his life. I watched it destroy him physically, and then I watched it kill him. And I have spent my entire life trying to remain cognizant of the fact that I inherited his genes, and even outside of him, there are other alcoholics in his family. Like, my uncle used to be one, my grandfather, my dad's father used to be one as well. So it runs pretty strongly in there, and I've just tried to be careful with all sorts of things. But I just didn't stop to think that, yeah, you can get addicted to behavioral stuff. It's not just physical substances you have to worry about. What I'm getting around to, and I guess I've just been kind of trying to avoid coming right out and say it, is even if doctors aren't going to officially label me an addict or anything, I have a very serious problem with sex and porn addiction. Like, that is just what it is. Like, I know, like, the official diagnosis has to be given by a doctor, because that's considered a mental problem, and I haven't seen a doctor about this. Like, I've mentioned it to therapists before, but I haven't like seen a doctor specifically to say, hey, is this a thing? And even then, they might not diagnose me, because it has to affect your life in, I believe, a substantial way before it's officially classified as an addiction. But that's not really important, because it has affected my life. It hasn't affected my life as badly as I've seen it affect other people's lives. Like, again, I saw my father as an alcoholic. I saw him lose his job. I saw him go to prison twice. I saw him just destroy all of his friendships and multiple marriages and his relationships with his kids. Like, I watched him do all of that because he just couldn't get better. And I know he tried. I know he tried, but he just wasn't able to for whatever reason. And the thing about being an addict is you're always going to see somebody who's worse than you. You know, like, you're always going to be comparing yourself to others who are far off or far worse off than you are. Like, you can say, okay, sure, I do heroin occasionally and I need it to fall asleep, but Dave did heroin right before picking his kids up from school and then he crashed and broke his arm. I never did anything that bad. And I mean, sure, technically Dave has fucked up worse than you, but you are still, you still have a problem. And I did see my father compare himself to others, and that was how he convinced himself he didn't need to try and stop drinking because, like, hey, other people are worse off than I am, even though, again, he, like, lost his job, he nearly burnt our house down once or twice because, like, he turned the stove on and then forgot about it and passed out. And I feel like I'm talking about my father more than myself in this. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to do that. Like, again, it's kind of an awkward thing to go into, I admit, but I am the one that decided to make this video, and I'm going to post it, okay? I promise I'm going to post this. But what I'm getting at is, like, I've seen this sort of behavior, I've seen what this sort of thing can do to people, and yet it still hit me, because my father, I know he started drinking, or at least he started drinking really heavily around the time I was born, and according to what my mom has told me, it's because he was trying to fall asleep. Like, he just was having trouble sleeping, so he would just start drinking really heavily at night, and then it got to a point where he couldn't fall asleep without doing that, and then it just snowballed from there and got worse and worse and worse. In my case, it's pretty normal. Like, I used to be a teenage boy. I know I still kind of look like one, but I used to be a teenage boy, and as a teenage boy, you get horny. Like, you go through puberty, you get sexual desires. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't feel guilt or shame about my desires, and fuck anyone who tries to make me feel that way. That's why I left the church. But, you know, you do that, you have internet access, you watch porn. Like, that's just what you do, right? And for a long time, I think it was a fine level of consumption. Like, again, I think, like, I don't know if there's, like, a scientifically recognized level of what's okay, but, like, I was watching porn and masturbating enough, or to the point where it wasn't seriously affecting the rest of my life. And again, I'm sorry, this is awkward and a little gross, but, like, I have to go into it. The thing is, looking back, I can see that throughout my entire teenage years, I was depressed. I did have depression looking back. I mean, I still have it, but, like, now I've learned to deal with it in various ways. I have medication and stuff. Back then, I didn't have that. I was undiagnosed for a very long time. And so looking back, I can realize, like, okay, I wasn't getting attention from girls back then, and I didn't have many friends. So I was using this as a free dopamine hit, essentially. You know, like, numbing the pain sounds melodramatic, but that is essentially what I was doing there. And again, it wasn't at too bad of a level until I was around 19, maybe 20. And that was, you know, when I was in college, and I just had more time where I was at home, and because most of my friends that I had were all just, like, super busy with school and work and such, I just wasn't seeing them very often. I was by myself a lot, and the combination of, again, still having sexual desires, still, how do I even put this, still being lonely again, not getting much attention from, I guess I should start saying women at that point, but whatever, not getting much attention, you start using this as a dopamine hit, and, well, sometimes it just, or most of the time, it just escalates from there because you need more and more and more to get where you're going. Again, I'm sorry if this is gross, but, like, that's just what it is. And so eventually, this just got to a point where I was watching what I think most people would consider way too much porn. Like, most days, there would be 2 or 3 hours worth that I was watching. And if you're wondering, how can you do that for 2 or 3 hours? Trust me, whatever you're picturing, the reality is probably worse. And again, this was a very regular thing. It was happening constantly. And it just escalated slowly enough that I didn't think too much about it. It just sort of, I looked back like 6 months later and realized, God damn, I'm doing this a lot more than I used to. And I realized it was a problem when there were like physical issues. Like, it's not really a secret that overconsumption of porn can cause erectile dysfunction. Do I need to finish that thought? And so I was stopping and thinking, like, okay, I'm doing this too much. And so occasionally I would try to stop. I'd just be like, okay, let's just cut this out of my life for a little while and see where it goes. Like, let's just stop and see if I don't have to do it anymore. But quitting cold turkey never worked because there was just like an itch at the back of my brain telling me, hey, what are you doing? We need our hit today. Come on, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And I think anyone who's ever like tried to quit smoking or anything like that can probably identify with that feeling, because yeah, like your brain just gets used to it, and you get used to it physically and mentally. And I mean, physical and mental stuff isn't completely separate the way we like to think of it. Like, our brain is just a series of chemical reactions. So mental stimuli is physical stimuli, and vice versa. But like, trying to just quit would never work for me. It would always, like, the itch would have to be scratched. I'd go back on it. And again, like, I had unmedicated depression, so when I stopped getting daily dopamine hits like that, my mood would just drop like a rock, and it would get substantially worse. And it was around this time I realized, like, okay, yes, I am dependent on this. And I also realized that, like, I was thinking about trying to get my next hit while I was doing other stuff that should have been occupying my mind, like when I was at school, or when I was at work, or when I was with friends. Like, just this occupied a substantial chunk of my mental real estate, and it just shouldn't. Like, again, there's nothing wrong with being horny, wanting to have sex, wanting to get yourself off, but there's a limit, okay? And when it gets to that point where you like just constantly need the stimulation, that's when I understood, okay, there's a problem. And so what I decided to do was to cut back on it, like, because quitting cold turkey just didn't work for me. So I decided, okay, let's, instead of doing every day, let's do every other day or every 3 days or something. And long story short, doing that worked for me. Like, rather than quitting altogether, just bringing it back to a healthier level, or at least what I think is a healthier level. And so by just stepping down like that, I was able to get to a point where, I'll be straight up, I haven't completely quit, and I don't really see the need to. Maybe I'm lying to myself, or coping, or whatever, but I don't see a need to completely shut myself off from having sexual desires, because, I can only have sex so often. Wait, the way I worded that sounded weird, but, I'm not in a relationship right now. I'm not good at starting them. I'm not good at maintaining them, to be quite frank, but, without that, like, so if you're wondering, like, James, when you make videos joking about porn and stuff, well, I know a lot of this information. I'm like an alcoholic who has an encyclopedic knowledge of wines, Like, it's something I spent too much time on in my life. And most alcoholics and addicts, you'll find, have to quit completely, because if they try just doing whatever it is they were addicted to a little bit, then that'll pull them back in full force. So that's why people who were alcoholics have to stop drinking completely. And again, I didn't stop completely with this, but I've gotten it to a level where I feel it works out okay. And also, around the time I quit, or quit around quotes, like around the time I cut back, let's say. Like I said, I was so used to the daily hits of dopamine, and my life was not in a great place in that time to begin with. I mean, my depression just came back with a vengeance. You know, I can. This was around 2019, late 2019. I'd say like September, October. So almost exactly 4 years ago. And this is, well, it was after my YouTube channel had already started to grow and become semi-relevant, and this was the closest I'd ever come to taking my own life. Like, I know that is strange and pathetic, but again, remember, the addiction is not the problem. The addiction is the symptom of a problem. Like, you're using it to deal with something like depression or anxiety or loneliness or whatever, and that is, you know, once you get rid of the thing you're addicted to, that just comes back with a vengeance, and that is what happened with me. Obviously, I didn't kill myself, but I came pretty close, and other than a few relapses, I think I'm in an okay place. You know, again, maybe I should discuss this further with a doctor, but it hasn't been causing me issues for a long time. And I know that was rambly and it took longer than it probably needed to, but the reason I felt that I should probably make this video is that anytime I've seen anyone notable talk about sex addiction or porn addiction, which are, again, those are the same thing. Like, I'm not going to say my relationship with actual sex has always been super healthy. I like to think I'm in a better spot with it now than I used to be, but again, it's pretty much the same as porn, because you're looking for sexual gratification. You're essentially pushing the same buttons, or you're pushing most of the same buttons in your brain. So those are the same thing. And anytime I saw anyone notable talk about either sex or porn addiction, they just went off the fucking deep end with it. Like Terry Crews, a great actor, I like him, I like his work. He also had a serious problem with porn addiction in his past, and, you know, good on him for working past it and talking about it. But he's talking about it in a religious way. Like, he's working with an organization called Stop the New Drug, which is a Christian organization that just wants to ban porn altogether. And again, I understand that he's had his issues, but he's like going on about how it's evil and always bad for you and stuff. And I really think hyperbole like that isn't going to help, because most people are going to hear that and dismiss it because frankly, it's nonsense. And then you do a little bit of research into this, and admittedly, there's not a whole lot of medical or psychological research about porn addiction, but you can see that like other famous people have talked about it, and most of them, honestly, the way they describe it, at least, it doesn't sound like they had a real addiction. You know, it sounds like they were, because most of them were just like religious people who felt bad for having sexual desires at all. And I mean, I also used to hear about this sort of thing back when I was religious, back when I was still a Christian. Like, I remember my church having like signs and stuff saying 40% of Christian men suffer from sex addiction. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a very high number. But now I'm looking back, I'm realizing, no, most of those people are not sex addicts. They're people who want to have sex with their wife once every 2 weeks, but they've been indoctrinated to think that having sexual desires is bad, and so they think, oh no, I want this at all, therefore I am an addict. And same with porn addiction. It's like they saw a bikini magazine one time, and they just immediately think, I'm an addict, I need help, and they talk about it, and they like try to use it as propaganda to scare the other kids in the church and stuff, and so on and so forth. And like I said at the beginning, the person who talked about this, who had like a sex and porn addiction, who talked about it quite candidly, I'll admit, and who seemed to have his head on at least mostly straight, was Russell fucking Brand. And maybe in retrospect it was stupid of me to think that, but like, I don't know, I was never a huge fan of the guy, but again, he and I struggled with something similar, and so seeing him talk about it was, not inspirational, that's not the word, but it was a bit comforting to see, like, okay, yeah, you can admit that this is a problem without being a religious crazy. That didn't stay long, though, because, again, he just went off the deep end. He has been a crazy person for a while, and then it turns out, oh, hey, he's just a straight-up rapist. So I guess what I'm getting around to is I felt the need to make this so that other people could see it and realize that, like, yeah, okay, being a sex addict or a porn addict, or both, because, again, basically the same thing, that doesn't make you evil. And even if you yourself are not, you don't have to be afraid of us. Like, I promise you, most sex addicts are not going to sexually assault you. Like, we're not. Most of us are normal people, and even if we don't necessarily understand we have a problem, most of us understand the concept of consent. And if we don't, then there's an issue other than the addiction. And I'll admit, I didn't think this video over super hard before making it, which is why there's probably going to be a lot of cuts and a lot of pauses and stuff in it. But that is the gist of it, you know? Like, I figured this should be out there because I'm not famous by any means, but I just, if someone else is having issues, you're not a bad person for it. You know? You're just not. And again, I did technically talk about this publicly a little while ago, but, like, most of you didn't see that. And actually, while I was talking about it with Rico, he mentioned that he himself has also had issues with this. So, like, Rico, I hope you're doing well if you ever see this. And I don't really know anywhere else to go with this, but just wrapping it all up, like, I have seen firsthand what addiction can do to you. Not just to you, but to all your loved ones. Like, these things have a splash effect. And I didn't want to end up like my father, so I didn't. Or at least I haven't so far. You know, he was in his 50s when he died. I'm only 27. And I don't know. That's about all I can think to say right now. So I guess if you have any other questions, let me know down below. And once again, you're not a bad person if you have an addiction of any sort. And I wish you all a lovely day.